Okay, welcome back to Biology in Focus. Today we're going to study Chapter 34, Circulation and Gas Exchange. This is basically a chapter, it's going to wind up being about cardiopulmonary system. And my name is Mr. Sparks, and this is a lecture for John Tyler Community College. Okay, this is the overview. The resources that animals' cells require, such as nutrients and oxygen, enter the cytoplasm of the cells of each cell by crossing the plasma membrane. In unicellular organisms, these exchanges occur directly with the environment, usually a liquid environment. Most multicellular organisms rely on specialized systems that carry out exchange with the environment and transport materials through the body. In this chapter, we're mostly talking about gases and dissolved gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. Gills are an example of a specialized exchange system in animals. Oxygen diffuses from the water into the blood vessels, and CO2 diffuses from the blood into the water. The internal transport and gas exchange are functionally related in most animals. Okay, here's the axolotl. It's a salamander from Mexico, and it has gills. Now this is unusual because in most salamander species, they lose their gills as they become adults. But in this species, it retains the gills, and this is known as pedomorphosis. And pedo refers to child, and morphosis refers to shape. So a pedomorphic animal is one that has childlike characteristics, as does this axolotl. Now, the gills on the axolotl, they spread out from behind the head, just as you can see here in this image, and they have little feathery appendages on them, and that's where the exchange of gases occurs. Oxygen from the high oxygen water environment diffuses into the low oxygen salamander, the axolotl, and then carbon dioxide, which is built up inside the salamander through respiration, through cellular respiration, is then evacuated from the body out the same gills into the water where it has low carbon dioxide abundance. So this is basically a process of diffusion. Circulatory systems link exchange surfaces with cells throughout the body. Small nonpolar molecules such as oxygen and carbon dioxide move between cells and their immediate surroundings by diffusion. Diffusion is proportional to the square of the distance traveled. Diffusion is only efficient over small distances. So in order for a gas to get to a cell, it has to be really close to that cell. And that's what the capillary beds are really for. The capillaries are tiny little vessels, they exchange oxygen over those small distances almost directly into the cells. So the closer that just to familiarize you with the process going on here, it's the time it takes for a substance to diffuse from one place to another is proportional to the square of the distance. For example, a quantity that takes 1 second to diffuse 100 nanometers will take 100 seconds to diffuse 1 millimeter, and almost 3 hours to diffuse 1 centimeter. So this relationship between diffusion time and distance places constant constraint on the body plan of an animal. In small or thin animals, cells can exchange material directly with the environment surrounding them. In most animals, cell exchange materials comes with the environment via a fluid-filled circulatory system. So most complex multicellular animals have a circulatory system, and we're going to look at some of these in greater detail. Some animals lack a circulatory system. Cnidarians, such as jellyfish, have elaborate gastrovascular cavities, and that's where they they live in the water, and they just interact directly with their environment for their when they obtain their food, and it travels into their gastrovascular cavity and then throughout their body almost directly. And the gases are exchanged in jellies, other cnidarians, even more directly with the environment. A gastrovascular cavity functions in both digestion and distribution of substances throughout the body. The body wall that encloses the gastrovascular cavity is only 2 cells thick. Flatworms have a gastrovascular cavity and a flat body shape to optimize diffusional exchange with the environment. So here's a flatworm, here's its eyes on its head right here, and here's the gastrovascular cavity that's been dyed red. Now this is the mouth, and it's also the anus here, and it will, when the flatworm comes up on a food source, a piece of vegetation perhaps, it will exude that mouth and then draw in food and pass it into the gastrovascular cavities, and through this gastrovascular cavity, it will get passed around through the body. So it's like a very primitive circulatory system. A circulatory system has circulatory fluid, a set of interconnecting vessels, and a muscular pump and the heart. Several basic types of circulatory systems have arisen during evolution, each representing adaptations to constraints of anatomy and environment. All circulatory systems are either open or closed. In insects and other arthropods, crabs and lobsters and some molluscs, circulatory fluid bathes the organs directly in an open circulatory system. In an open circulatory system, there is no distinction between circulatory fluid and interstitial fluid, the fluid that surrounds the cells. And this general body fluid is called hemolymph. So it's a combination of blood and lymph and interstitial fluid and circulatory fluid. So here on the left we have a grasshopper, and it shows an open circulatory system of an insect, of an arthropod. And here it's got pores that are open to the atmosphere. That this is where the organism breathes in oxygen and exhales carbon dioxide. And then it's got like a tubular heart. That's kind of a muscular a set of contracting muscles along the central circulatory system, and these pump hemolymph, and the hemolymph dumps into the tissues, into the interstitial fluid that surrounds the tissues and bathes the tissues, and then it gets drawn up back into the main open circulatory system, and the heart pumps it out again, and then it draws it up again. So this is the open circulatory system of the insect. Now the worm, the annelids, we're more interested in them because they have a circulatory system that is like our own. It's a closed circulatory system. The worm has hearts. It actually has 5 hearts. You may have heard that when you were a kid. I know when I was a kid I used to dissect worms and try to find the 5 hearts. These 5 hearts pump in a particular direction, and they pump the blood through the worm, and I believe that they actually get a lot of their oxygen through direct. They don't have lungs, so they directly obtain oxygen through the atmosphere. Okay, here's a closer detail of the insect circulatory system, pumping the hemolymph through the insect. The closed circulatory system is the circulatory fluid fluid called blood that is confined in, excuse me, let me start over. In closed circulatory systems, the circulatory fluid called blood is confined to vessels and is distinct from interstitial fluid. These systems are found in annelids, most cephalopods, and all vertebrates. Annelids are the roundworms. Um, one or more hearts pump blood through the vessels. Chemical exchange occurs between the blood and the interstitial fluid, and between interstitial fluid and body cells. So the blood interacts with the interstitial fluid, and then the interstitial fluid interacts with the cells. The blood doesn't go directly to the cells, it interacts through the interstitial fluid. Okay, here's the worm again in greater detail. We've got the closed circulatory system. Here are the hearts, and here's pumping blood through the circulatory system of the animal. Humans and other vertebrates have a closed circulatory system called the cardiovascular system. The three main types of blood vessels are arteries, veins, and capillaries. Blood flow is one way in these vessels. Arteries branch into arterioles that carry blood away from the heart to the capillaries. So arteries are strong veins that are they are fairly muscular in nature, and they transport blood to the arterioles, which are smaller veins, still transporting oxygenated blood, and they carry oxygenated blood away from the heart into the capillaries. In the capillaries, the network of capillaries is called the capillary beds, and they are sites of chemical exchange between blood and interstitial fluid. So the capillary beds is where the oxygen is released into the tissues and carbon dioxide is taken up, and then it goes back around through the system, circulatory system, the cardiopulmonary system, into the lungs. So cardio means heart, and pulmonary refers to lungs. Venules converge into veins and return blood from the capillaries to the heart. So after the blood has done its job, it's released its nutrients, and it's released its oxygen into the interstitial fluid near the receiving cells. Then venules, which are small veins, converge into veins, and veins return blood from the capillaries into the heart. Arteries and veins are distinguished by a direction of blood flow, not by oxygen content. Vertebrate hearts contain two or more chambers. Blood enters through the atrium and is pumped out through the ventricle. Bony fishes, rays, and sharks have a single circulation with a two-chambered heart. In single circulation, blood leaving the heart passes through two capillary beds before returning. Okay, so here's the single circulation of the fish. The heart pumps the blood through the ventricle. This is usually the stronger chamber, the ventricle, and then into the artery, which is taking the blood to the gills. In the gills, it receives oxygenation, and that oxygenation blood then travels through the body and then into the body capillaries, where it releases the oxygen and picks up carbon dioxide and travels in through the vein back into the heart, through the atrium, into the ventricle. So that's the single circulation of the fish. The double circulation of the amphibian is a little more complex, but it's still simplified. The ventricle, there's only one ventricle in the heart of most amphibians and reptiles. Some reptiles, crocodilians for example, do have a split septum here, and they have a double circulation system similar to mammals. But in most amphibians, they've got just three chambers in that heart. And this is called double circulation of amphibians. So in this one, blood is pumped from the heart into the lung, where it receives where blood is pumped from the ventricle into the vein, the main vein where it picks up the pulmonary vein, where it picks up oxygen from the from the lungs or skin and capillaries, then it returns to the heart, and then it's pumped through the rest of the body. And it just has 3 chambers in that heart. Mammals and other mammals in particular, and crocodilians as well, also they have a 4-chamber heart. Okay, so the pulmonary artery delivers the deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and then the lungs oxygenate the blood, and that's traveled back into the main artery, into the left ventricle, and passes up through the main aorta, and then travels through the systemic capillaries into the body of the organism. Okay, now here's the single circulation of the fish. We just went over that. You can take a look at page 687 if you want to get in closer detail on this. Double circulation. Amphibians, reptiles, and mammals have double circulation. Oxygen poor and oxygen rich blood is pumped separately from the right and left sides of the heart. Having both pumps within the heart simplifies the coordination of the pumping cycle. Okay, so double circulation in mammals. We're going to go into this in greater detail later in the chapter. In reptiles and mammals, oxygen-poor blood flows through the pulmonary circuit to pick up oxygen through the lungs. In amphibians, oxygen-poor blood flows through a pulmocutaneous circuit. So that means it goes through the lungs as well as through the skin to pick up oxygen through the lungs and skin. Oxygen-rich blood delivers oxygen through the systemic circuit. Double circulation maintains higher blood pressure in the organs than does single circulation. Some vertebrates with double circulation are intermittent breathers. These animals have adaptations that enable the circulatory system temporarily to bypass lungs. Frogs and other amphibians have a 3-chambered heart, 2 atria and 1 ventricle. The ventricle pumps blood in a forked artery that splits the ventricle's output in the pulmocutaneous circuit and the systemic circuit. When underwater, blood flow to the lungs is nearly shut off. Turtles, snakes, and lizards have a 3-chambered heart as well, 2 atria and 1 ventricle. Their circulatory system allows control of relative amounts of blood flowing to the lungs and body. In alligators, caimans, and other crocodilians, a septum divides the ventricle. A connection to atrial valves can temporarily shunt blood away from the lungs as needed. Mammals and birds have a 4-chambered heart with 2 atria and 2 ventricles. The left side of the heart pumps and receives only oxygen-rich blood, while the right side receives and pumps only oxygen-poor blood. There is no mechanism to vary relative blood flow to the lungs and the body. Mammals and birds are endotherms and require more oxygen than ectotherms. This is one reason why the cardiopulmonary system of mammals is so much more efficient. Coordinated cycles of the heart contraction drive double circulation in mammals. The mammalian cardiovascular system meets the body's continuous demand for oxygen. Blood begins its flow in the right ventricle, pumping blood to the lungs via the pulmonary arteries. The blood loads O2 and unloads CO2 in the capillary beds of the lungs. These are also known as the alveoli. Oxygen-rich blood from the lungs enters the heart at the left atrium via the pulmonary veins and is pumped through the aorta to the body tissues of the left ventricle. The aorta provides blood through the heart through the coronary arteries. And the coronary arteries are very important. If you've ever heard of somebody had a coronary heart attack, that means their coronary arteries were blocked generally by a process called coronary thrombosis, in which blood platelets can start to cause a clot in that coronary artery, and that can, if it stops that coronary artery, stops blood flow to the heart, and that's a massive heart attack, a massive coronary. Diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide take place in the capillary beds throughout the body. Blood returns to the heart through the superior vena cava, blood from the head, neck, and forearms, and the inferior vena cava, blood from the trunk and hind limbs or legs. The superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava flow right into the right atrium. Okay. Okay, so here's just a schematic of how blood flows. We'll start here at number 1. This is where venous blood is pumped from the heart through the right ventricle. This is one of the strongest muscles in the body here. It's constantly working, obviously. Your heart is always beating. It's constantly getting exercise. When it contracts, it forces blood up through the pulmonary artery, and it travels in the pulmonary artery. It splits into the right lung and the left lung, and then in the lung it picks up oxygen and it drops off carbon dioxide. Basically, a process of diffusion here. There's a lower content of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so it drops off, the hemoglobin drops off the carbon dioxide, and there's a higher concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere, so it drops off oxygen into the blood system. Then it goes immediately from the pulmonary system. This is all happening within your heart and your lungs. This is all very close system right here. It's approximately very close, very near in physical distance. That pulmonary vein then transports that the oxygenated blood back to the heart. Now this is interesting because these have depleted. This transports, the pulmonary artery transports oxygen depleted blood, which you would think is mostly the job of a vein, but in this case it's the pulmonary artery, because here it picks up oxygen and then it returns to the heart in the pulmonary vein. Now the pulmonary vein is then travels through the left atrium and the left ventricle, and it gets forced up through the aorta. The aorta has about 3 different pipes on it, and those pipes travel to different parts of the body. One goes right through the neck, right to the head, to the brain. So it's very important that the brain gets highly oxygenated blood immediately, and the heart makes sure of that by pumping blood through the aorta into the main arteries of the body, through the carotid artery. The carotid artery is the artery in your neck, and then directly into the brain. A closer look at the mammalian heart provides a better understanding of double circulation. When the heart contracts, it pumps blood. When it relaxes, its chambers fill with blood. And one complete cycle of pumping and filling is called the cardiac cycle. Atria have relatively thin walls and serve as a collection chambers for blood returning to the heart. So that's where your blood loads up for pumping in the ventricles. The ventricles are more muscular and contract much more forcefully than the atria. The volume of blood each ventricle pumps per minute is called the cardiac output. Okay, so here is, this is where, all right, your pulmonary artery, this is going to your lungs right here, and this is your pulmonary veins, which go into the heart. So they are, there's major major veins and minor veins. So here, the superior vena cava here is draining deoxygenated blood into the right ventricle. Here's the inferior vena cava, which comes up from the bottom, also takes blood into the heart here. These atrioventricle valves are situated so that when the right ventricle pumps, it forces these atrioventricle valves shut and allows these semilunar valves to open. So water comes in here, and it's like a little machine. Now, I wasn't able to get, somewhere there's an animation. You can probably find it on YouTube. It may be on the study guide, the video study guide, but it's interesting to take a look at this. You know, the blood comes in here, the right ventricle contracts, and it pushes the blood through the pulmonary artery into the lungs, where it gets oxygenated, returns back to the heart through the semilunar valve, and it has these through the atrioventricular valve, and then it gets pumped up through the semilunar valve here at the top. So the semilunar valves are at the top of the heart, and the atrioventricular valves are between the atrium and the ventricle. Okay, so atrioventricular, atrium, ventricle. And semilunar valves are between the ventricle and the pulmonary artery, or the ventricle and the aorta. So here's the aorta with its three different main arteries that come off. Okay, so this is showing you how blood is pumped through the heart. Blood comes in through the atrial and ventricular during diastole. So there's two main phases in the heart pumping. There's diastole, which is the relaxing of the heart, and systole, which is the contraction of the heart. I've also heard it pronounced diastole and systole, but I've heard diastole and systole more frequently. So the heart relaxes during diastole. It allows blood to come in. The atriums shut off, and the ventricles begin to close, and then the ventricles close more forcefully, and this forces blood in through the pulmonary arteries and through the aorta. The heart rate, also called the pulse, is the number of beats per minute. The stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by a single contraction. Cardiac output depends on both the heart rate and the stroke volume. 4 valves prevent backflow of blood in the heart. The atrioventricular valve separates each atrium and ventricle, and the semilunar valves control the blood flow to the aorta and the pulmonary artery. The lub-dub sound of the heartbeat is caused by the recoil of blood against the atrioventricular valves, lub, and then the semilunar valves, dub. So when you hear that sound, lub-dub, 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 that's the sound of the valves opening and closing in the heart. Backflow of the blood through a defective valve causes a heart murmur. So if you've heard of people that have a heart murmur, that's a defection in one of the valves, either the semilunar or the atrioventricular. Maintaining the heart's rhythmic beat. Some cardiac muscles are autorhythmic, meaning they contract without any signal from the nervous system. The sinoatrial node, or pacemaker, sets the rate and timing at which all the other cardiac cells contract. So the pacemaker is really important. You've heard people get an artificial pacemaker put in their heart if they've had, maybe they had a coronary thrombosis or another form of heart attack, and they have damaged their natural pacemaker. They may have to have an artificial pacemaker put in. The pacemaker sets the rate and timing at which the other cardiac muscle cells contract. The sinoatrial node produces electrical impulses that spread rapidly through the heart and can be recorded on the electrocardiogram. Okay, let's go through this here. All right, so electrical signals follow a set path through the heart in establishing the heart rhythm. The diagrams here trace the movement of electrical signals in yellow during the cardiac cycle. Specialized cells involved in electrical control of the rhythm are indicated in orange. Under each step, the corresponding portion of the electrocardiogram is highlighted in yellow. The portion of the ECG or EKG to the right of the spike represents electrical activity that reprimes the ventricles for the next round of contraction. So here's your sinoatrial node, your pacemaker. It's located up here just behind the vena cava, the superior vena cava, and then it fires off an electrical signal. Now the heart actually has its own electrical signal independent of the human body. It's not independent of the human body, really. It depends. The heart has to have blood flow, and it has to have access to oxygen and remove depleted carbon dioxide. So it's not entirely independent. But if you take the heart, you can take a living heart, like in. Did anybody see Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom when the bad guy took the heart out of the victim and it was still beating in his hand? Well, that's a phenomenon that actually occurs. Like back in the days of human sacrifice, it would be possible to cut somebody's heart out of their chest and pull it from their chest, and then that heart would still be beating. And the reason it would still be beating is because that sinoatrial node is basically independent of the rest of the body. I mean, the heart itself is not, but the sinoatrial node will keep beating even despite being the heart being removed from its cavity. So from the sinoatrial node, the signals are delayed for some period of time at the atrioventricular node, and this allows the ventricle to fill up with blood. So during this, it's a very strategic pause. So during this pause in activity, the ventricle will fill up with blood, and then bundle branches pass signals to the heart apex. And here at the heart apex is located the Purkinje fibers. The Purkinje fibers are all like nerve fibers on steroids. Basically, they're really charged with electrical charge, and they cause the heart to contract very forcefully. So signals spread throughout the ventricle. So here you see the pacemaker initiates the phase. The AV node causes it to pause, allowing the chambers to fill up. The bundle branches pass the signals to the heart apex, and when they reach the heart apex, they stimulate the Purkinje fibers, and the Purkinje fibers then cause the heart to contract. Impulses from the sinoatrial node travel to the atrioventricular node. At the AV node, the impulses are delayed and then travel to the Purkinje fibers that make the ventricles contract. The pacemaker is regulated by two portions of the nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous divisions. The sympathetic division speeds up the pacemaker, and the parasympathetic division slows it down. The pacemaker is also regulated by hormones and temperature. Patterns of blood flow and pressure reflect the structure of an arrangement of blood vessels. The physical principles that govern the movement of water in a plumbing system also apply to the functioning of animal circulatory systems. So, a vessel cavity is called the central lumen, just like the lumens in the digestive tract. The epithelial layer that lines blood vessels is called the endothelium. The endothelium is smooth and minimizes resistance to blood flow. Capillaries have thin walls. The endothelium is basal lamina to reflect the exchange of substances. So capillaries have thin walls, so they would be subject to changes in blood pressure. But what happens is the blood vessels, they don't just go into one narrow capillary, they go into an entire capillary bed, and that capillary bed spreads out the pressure, the blood pressure. Arteries and veins have an endothelium, smooth muscle, and connective tissue. Arteries have thicker walls than veins and accommodate the high blood pressure pumped from the heart. Okay, so here we have a lot of different information here. Let me see if we can make sense of it here. So here's an artery. It's got a lot of connective tissue surrounding it. It's got some smooth muscle here, and the endothelium, which is the internal layer of cells that which the blood actually has contact in. Okay, so here's an artery right here. You can see it's a greater amount of connective tissue here, and here's a vein next to it. It's got thinner connective tissue. You can see thinner connective tissue here, and it's actually here's the endothelium, and it may have a vein or an artery. A vein could have a valve in it to help it to prevent from blood flowing back down into. So this could be like your foot down here, and then you're trying to get blood back to your heart. So you need these valves in the vein to help prevent the blood from backflowing back into the vein. So here's the connective tissue. There's considerably less amount of it. And here's the surface of the vein. So basically what I want you guys to know for sure here is that arteries transport into the arterioles, and arterioles go into the capillary. And they don't go into one single capillary. They go into a capillary bed. So these arterioles spread out that blood into these capillaries. Now you check this out. The capillaries themselves are they're so small, they're so tiny that basically they're basically one red blood cell in width. So that one red blood cell goes through these capillaries, and then this is where the exchange of nutrients and oxygen and then the pickup of waste and carbon dioxide goes in, and oxygen and nutrients goes out. It all happens in these very thin-walled capillaries. Okay, here's the thin-walled capillaries. Blood flow velocity. Blood vessel diameter influences blood flow. Velocity of blood flow is slowest in the capillary beds as a result of the high resistance and large total cross-sectional area. So those capillary beds, they reduce blood flow. If that blood went through one vein, it would be like when if you take a garden hose and you're outside and you put your thumb over the end of the garden hose, and it causes the water to spray very, very high pressure. But capillaries are not like that. They spread out. They take that. It would be like if you took that garden hose and you put an attachment onto it that sprayed soft water. Usually, what that attachment allows for multiple ports of the water to exit. So velocity of blood flow is slowest in the capillary beds as a result of the high resistance and large total cross-sectional areas. Blood flow in capillaries is necessarily slow for exchange of materials. Okay, so here's blood. This is the area per centimeter squared per the blood vessel. So here's the artery. The main artery is the aorta. The our aorta splits off into arteries. As it splits into more and more parts, it gets reduced velocity. It goes into the arterioles and then ultimately into the capillaries. And then blood pressure is greatest reduced on the veins, because the veins are just pushing blood back into it's almost negative pressure, because that heart is drawing blood into it. So here's systolic pressure, diastolic pressure. That's where the pumping is occurring. That's where the relaxation is occurring. Okay, you get the idea. So the blood, as it travels through the circulatory system, it loses pressure, loses velocity. Blood flows from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure. Blood pressure exerts a force in all directions. Systole is the contraction phase of cardiac cycle. Pressure at the time of ventricle contraction is called systolic pressure. Diastole is the relaxation phase of the cardiac cycle. Diastolic pressure is lower than systolic. Blood pressure is determined by cardiac output and peripheral resistance due to constriction of arterioles. Vasoconstriction is the contraction of smooth muscle in arterial walls and increases blood pressure. Vasodilation is the relaxation of smooth muscles in the arterioles, and it causes blood pressure to fall. So these are ways that your body can regulate blood pressure. Vasoconstriction and vasodilation help maintain adequate blood flow as the body's demands changes. Nitric oxide is a major inducer of vasodilation. The peptide endothelin is an important inducer of vasoconstriction. Nitrous oxide is a major inducer of vasodilation, and endothelin, a peptide, is the most potent inducer of vasoconstriction. Cues from the nervous and endocrine systems regulate the production of nitrous oxide and endothelin in the blood vessels, where the activities regulate blood pressure. Fainting is caused by inadequate blood flow to the head. Has anybody fainted? I don't know. I've come close a couple of times, and I always have to hold on to something and make sure I'm not going to topple over. Animals with long necks require higher systolic blood pressure to pump blood against gravity. You can imagine that the heart of a giraffe is large in size, even for the size of the animal, because it has to push blood up that entire long neck. Gravity is a consideration for blood flow in veins, particularly in the legs. One-way valves in veins prevent backflow of blood. Blood returns to the heart through the contraction of the smooth muscle walls in the veins and the venules and the contraction of skeletal muscles. So even though the heart is drawing venous blood into it, it's the way that venous blood is getting back to the heart is through contraction of smooth muscles in the walls of the veins and the venules, the smaller parts of the veins, and the contraction of skeletal muscles. If you move around a lot, you're helping your blood to return to the heart. Every time your muscles contract, it helps your venous blood return to the heart. So here's a diagram of looks like blood coming up from the foot through the leg, and then there are these valves in the venous system. And these valves, they close and prevent blood from draining back into the foot. If you do get blood draining into the lower extremities, I believe that's called edema, or that might have to do something with water. That would be something I'd have to look that up. But you can get blood pooling in the feet and legs, and that's a failure of these systems, of these valves to operate properly. But when you're moving your muscles, you're moving your legs, you're running, you're walking, you are pushing the venous blood through the legs. Blood flows through only 5 to 10% of the body's capillary at times. Most of the time, the capillaries in major are shut off. Capillaries in major organs are usually filled to capacity, but blood supply in many other sites varies. So if you're at rest, your blood supply, your capillaries are going to constrict. Capillaries are also, when we were talking about thermoregulation, and the blood vessels in your surface of your skin contract to conserve heat, that is capillary constriction. Two mechanisms alter blood flow in capillary beds: vasoconstriction or vasodilation of the arteriole that supplies a capillary bed. Precapillary sphincters, ring of smooth muscles at the capillary bed entrance, open and close to regulate passage of blood. If you take a drink of alcohol and your face gets flushed, what's happening is the alcohol is inducing your capillary sphincters in your face to relax. And then as they relax, they allow blood to travel into your face, and that causes your face to get bright red. So that's, or not bright red, it causes it to flush. Critical exchange of substances take place across the thin walls of the capillaries. So basically, your digestion, we just went through the chapter of digestion. All of that is going through the capillaries and transporting itself into the interstitial walls of the cells are picking up those digested nutrients, essential amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. All of that is getting transported through the capillaries. Blood pressure tends to drive out fluid out of the capillaries. So the difference in solute concentration between blood and interstitial fluid, the blood's osmotic pressure, opposes fluid movement from the capillaries. Blood pressure is usually greater than osmotic pressure. The net loss of fluid from capillaries occurs in regions where blood pressure is highest. So where your capillary sphincters are dilated, that is increasing blood pressure, and that is causing a net loss of fluids from the capillaries in those regions where the blood pressure is highest. Fluid return by the lymphatic system. Okay, the lymphatic system is interesting. It's involved in your immune response. It transports a lot of white blood cells throughout it to different organs that are used in the immune response. Frankly, I'm not sure exactly how it all works, but I'll give you some basic information here. The lymphatic system returns fluid called lymph that leaks out from the capillary bed. So this is like that interstitial fluid and that fluid that's being pushed out by blood pressure in the capillary beds. Lymph has a similar composition to interstitial fluid. The lymphatic system drains into veins in the neck. The valves in the neck in the lymph vessels prevent the backflow of fluid. Okay, here is the lymph system. Over here to the right, on the top right-hand corner, the interstitial fluid bathing the tissues along with the white blood cells in it continually enters the lymphatic system. It enters the lymphatic system and drains. Fluid inside the lymphatic system called lymph flows through the lymphatic vessels into the body. Within the lymph nodes, these little they're kind of like tissue collections along the lymph system. Within the lymph nodes, pathogens and foreign particles in the circulating lymph encounter and activate cells that carry out defective actions. So it's kind of like a big filter. Like the spleen. The spleen is a big filter for spent red blood cells. It collects the dead and decomposing the dead red blood cells. That's the spleen's job. It's part of the lymphatic system. Now, lymphatic vessels return to the blood via two large ducts that drain into the veins near the shoulders. So this is where the lymph system reunites with the blood. Lymph flows through the lymphatic vessels shown in green. Foreign substances carried by the lymph are trapped in lymph nodes and lymphoid organs in yellow. The adenoids, tonsil, and spleen, Peyer's patches, and appendix. In steps 1 through 4, trace the flow of lymph and illustrate the critical role of lymph nodes in activating immune responses. This is on page 694 of your textbooks. Lymph vessels have valves to prevent backflow. Lymph nodes are organs that filter lymph and play an important role in the body's defense. Edema is the swelling of disruptions in the flow of lymph. Okay, so edema is, I said that was blood earlier. Well, it's not blood, it's lymph. The lymphatic system also plays a role in harmful immune responses, such as those responsible for asthma. Blood components function in exchange, transport, and defense. With open circulation, blood that is pumped comes direct contact with all cells and has the same composition as interstitial fluid. The closed circulatory system of vertebrates contain blood, which can be more highly specialized. Blood is a connective tissue that consisting of cells suspended in a liquid matrix called plasma. The cellular elements combine about 45% of volume of blood. Okay, so here's the breakdown of blood components. You can see most of the blood is blood plasma. It's mostly water. It's used for carrying a solvent for carrying other substances. It has the ability to buffer pH and regulate membrane permeability. It has various ions of sodium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, bicarbonate. It has certain plasma proteins, albumin and fibrinogen. Fibrinogen can be important in clotting. Immunoglobulins, which are antibodies. It's got which function in osmotic balance, pH buffering, clotting, defense. Substances transported by the blood, such as nutrients, such as glucose, fatty acids, and vitamins, waste products, and metabolism, and respiratory gases, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, and hormones. So a lot of the function of blood is carried out by the plasma. Now, the cellular elements of blood, what makes blood red is called the erythrocytes. Erythro is Greek for red, and these are non-nucleated cells. All of these cells come from the marrow, the bone marrow. The bone marrow produces leukocytes, these white blood cells. There are various different types. Many of them are involved in immune response. There are platelets, which are involved in clotting. Whenever there's a rupture in the cell, in the wall of the blood vessel, in the endothelium or the connective tissue, if that blood vessel is ruptured, the platelets will swarm in there and they'll cover that area and try to clot it up. If you get a scab, that's basically a combination of erythrocytes and platelets. And if you get pus, that is white blood cells, leukocytes, that are obtaining that are clotting, helping your blood to deal with the infection involved in that cut. Okay, this information is on page 695 in your textbook. Okay, blood plasma is about 90% water. Along its solutes are inorganic salts in the form of dissolved ions, sometimes called electrolytes. Plasma proteins influence blood pH, osmotic pressure, and viscosity. Particular plasma proteins function in lipid transport, immunity, and blood clotting. Blood contains two classes of cells: red blood cells, the erythrocytes, which transport oxygen, and white blood cells, the leukocytes, which function in defense. Platelets are a third cellular element, are fragments of cells that are involved in clotting. Okay, so here's the stem cells that occur in bone marrow. Much of the research is being done on these because, well, they really only can become these other blood cells, but they're not like totipotent embryonic blood stem cells. Totipotent embryonic blood cells or stem cells can become any cell in the body because they're extracted from the embryo. But there's some moral concern around that, so there's not too much research being done on them. The research was blocked several years ago. It may have been opened up then. I haven't been following that. But these are stem cells. In the bone marrow, they can become different kinds of blood cells. They can become B cells or T cells. These are lymphocytes. These are macrophages. They will run around and gobble up the viruses and bacteria in your blood system. And then there are the myeloid stem cells. These include the erythrocytes, which they lose their nucleus when they become mature. So they basically can be very tiny and squeeze through those capillaries. And then the eosinophils, basophils. Okay, and the platelets. The big ones that you guys should know is leukocytes, white blood cells, and lymphocytes, and erythrocytes and platelets. Erythrocytes are red blood cells, which are by far the most numerous blood cells. They contain hemoglobin, the iron-containing protein that transports oxygen. Each molecule of hemoglobin binds up to 4 molecules of oxygen. In mammals, mature erythrocytes lack nuclei. Sickle cell disease is caused by abnormal hemoglobin that polymerizes into aggregates. The aggregates can distort an erythrocyte into a sickle cell shape. So sickle cell anemia is a disease that comes from an adaptive trait. Sickle cell anemia occurs in Africa and some places in India. It's actually an adaptation to help reduce the impact of the malaria protist. So it was adaptaceous, but it was an adaptation. It was a beneficial adaptation. But if you receive the trait from one parent and not from the other, then you have a beneficial adaptation. If you receive the trait from both parents, then it's called sickle cell anemia. And it actually, when you're running and your body needs the oxygen the most, it actually deforms the nucleus or deforms the red blood cells, and it makes them less able to carry oxygen. Throughout a person's life, multipotent stem cells replace the worn-out cellular elements of blood. As erythrocytes circulate for about 120 days before they are replaced. Stem cells that produce red blood cells and platelets are located in the red marrow of bones like the ribs, the vertebrae, the sternum, and the pelvis. Leukocytes are the 5 major types of white blood cells, or leukocytes. They function in defense by engulfing bacteria and debris, or by mounting immune responses against foreign substances. They are both found in both in and outside of the circulatory system. Platelets are fragments of cells and function in blood clotting. Coagulation is the formation of a solid clot from liquid blood. A cascade of complex reactions converts inactive fibrinogen to fibrin, which forms the framework of a clot. The blood clot formed in a blood vessel is now called a thrombus and can block blood flow. So here we have a schematic of some platelets. Number 1, the clotting process begins when the endothelium of a vessel is damaged, exposing connective tissue in the vessel to the wall. Platelets adhere to the collagen fibers in the connective tissue and release a substance that makes the nearby platelets sticky. 2, the platelets form a plug that provides immediate protection against blood loss. 3, unless the break is very small, the plug is reinforced by a fibrin clot. Okay, so this is how red blood cells and fibrinogen and fibrin occur. So now just imagine that this is that main coronary artery in a heart, and you've heard the term coronary thrombosis. Well, this is thrombosis. This is when a blood cell gets completely blocked off or partially blocked off by a fibrin clot, by a red blood cell and platelet clot. That can cause coronary thrombosis. It's a medical condition that leads to heart attack. Okay, fibrin clot formation. Clotting factors released from the clumped platelets or damaged cells mix with clotting factors in the plasma, forming an enzymatic cascade that converts a plasma protein called prothrombin and its to its active form. Thrombin itself is an enzyme that catalyzes the final step of the clotting process and the conversion of the fibrinogen to fibrin. These threads of fibrin became interwoven into a clot. Cardiovascular diseases are disorders of the heart and the blood vessels. Cardiovascular diseases account for more than half of the deaths in the United States. Cholesterol, a steroid, typically helps maintain membrane fluidity. Low-density lipoprotein, or LDL, delivers cholesterol to cells for membrane production. High-density lipoprotein, or HDL, scavenges excess cholesterol for return to the liver. The risk of heart disease increases with a high LDL to HDL ratio. So if you're delivering more cholesterol to your cells for membrane production, then you are scavenging it. So if you're delivering it more than you're taking it up, then you're building up potential atherosclerosis, or the collection of plaque in the blood vessel. The risk for heart disease increases with a high LDL to HDL ratio. Inflammation is also a factor in cardiovascular disease. This is why people take baby aspirin, because baby aspirin actually reduces the level of inflammation in the body, and so by reducing that level of inflammation, it improves your chances dealing with cardiovascular disease. Atherosclerosis, heart attacks, and stroke. One type of cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, is caused by the buildup of fatty deposits in arteries. A fatty deposit is called a plaque. As it grows, the artery walls become thick and stiff, and the obstruction of the artery increases. Okay, so here's the plaque building up in an artery. Here's the endothelium, the internal part. Here's the lumen. Okay, this is the lumen, and then here's the blood clot. So here's the plaque built up, and then the blood is clotting up here, just with its platelets and its red blood cells are clotting with fibrin, and then it's narrowing down this artery. And this could be a coronary artery, or in arteriosclerosis, thickening of the arterial wall by plaque formation can restrict blood flow through the artery. Fragments of ruptured plaque can travel the bloodstream and become lodged in other arteries. In the blockage, it is in the artery that supplies the head, the heart, or brain. The result could be a heart attack or stroke, respectively. Heart attack or myocardial infarction is the death of cardiac muscles resulting from blockage of one or more coronary arteries. Coronary arteries supply oxygen-rich blood to the heart muscle. A stroke is the death of tissue in the brain, usually resulting from a rupture or a blockage of arteries in the head. Angina pectoris is caused by partial blockage of the coronary arteries and may cause chest pain. Risk factors and treatment of cardiovascular disease. A high LDL to HDL ratio increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. The proportion of LDL relative to HDL is increased by smoking and consumption of trans fats and decreased by exercise. Drugs called statins reduce LDL levels and therefore the risk of heart attacks. Inflammation plays a role in atherosclerosis, the thrombus formation. Aspirin inhibits inflammation and reduces the risk of heart attacks and stroke. Hypertension, high blood pressure, contributes to the risk of heart attack and stroke. Hypertension can be reduced by dietary changes, exercise, medication, or some combination of these. Gas exchange occurs across specialized respiratory surfaces. Gas exchange is the uptake of molecular O2 from the environment and the discharge of CO2 to the environment. All right, now wait a second here. I'm going to get a drink of water. Okay, gas exchange. Now we're going to move into the pulmonary system. We've exhausted the cardio system, and now we're going to move into the pulmonary system. Partial pressure gradients and gas exchanges. Partial pressure is the pressure exerted by a particular gas in a mixture of gases. Basically what you need to understand here is diffusion, where a gas will diffuse from an area of high concentration into an area of low concentration. Okay, partial pressure is the pressure exerted by the particular gas in a mixture of gases. For example, the atmosphere of 21% oxygen by volume, and so the particular pressure of oxygen is partial pressure of oxygen is 0.21 times the atmospheric pressure. So usually it's 1 atmosphere, so 0.21 times 1 is 0.21. Partial pressure does change, like if you're a scuba diver, if any of you guys are scuba divers, you know that the partial pressure of nitrogen in the atmosphere changes that as you go further deeper in depth, and it causes your body to absorb more nitrogen. If you stay down underwater for a long period of time, you can you can have bubbles in your bloodstream when you surface called the bends. That has to do with the partial pressure of nitrogen. Partial pressures also apply to gases dissolved in liquids such as water. When water is exposed to air, an equilibrium is reached and which the partial pressure of each gas is the same in the water and the air. A gas always undergoes net diffusion from a region of higher partial pressure to a region of lower partial pressure. Okay, so diffusion is a big concept here. You guys definitely want to look that up if you don't understand it already. Respiratory media. Oxygen is plentiful in air, and breathing air is relatively easy. In a given volume, there is less oxygen available in water than in air. Obtaining oxygen from water requires greater energy expenditure than air breathing. Aquatic animals have a variety of adaptations to improve efficiency in gas exchange. Okay, here's a bristleworm. It's an annelid. It's a polychaete. This marine worm, polychaetes, marine worms of the phylum Annelida, have a pair of flattened appendages called parapodia, singular parapodium, on each segment. The parapodia serve as gills and also function in crawling and swimming. In the sea star, the gills of the sea star are simple tubular projections under the skin. The hollow core of each gill is an extension of the coelom, the body cavity. Each gas exchange occurs by diffusion across the gill surfaces, and fluid in the coelom circulates in and out of the gills, aiding gas transport. The surfaces of a sea star's tube feet also function in gas exchange. Gas exchange across respiratory surfaces takes place by diffusion. Respiratory surfaces tend to be large and thin and are always moist to facilitate the gas exchange. Respiratory surfaces vary by animal and can include the skin, gills, trachea, and lungs. Amphibians use their skins, fish use their gills, insects use their tracheae, and vertebrates use their lungs. Or, mammals and reptiles use their lungs. Gills in aquatic animals. Gills are outfoldings of the body that create large surface area for gas exchange. Ventilation is the movement of the respiratory medium over the respiratory surface. Ventilation maintains the necessary partial pressure gradients of O2 and CO2 across the gills. Aquatic animals move through water or move water over their gills for ventilation. Fish use a countercurrent exchange system, kind of like that countercurrent heat exchange we discussed in homeostasis, where blood flows in the opposite direction to the water passing over the gills. Blood is always less saturated with oxygen than the water it meets. The countercurrent exchange mechanisms are remarkably efficient. So in here we see the structure and function of fish gills. A fish continuously pumps water through its mouth and over its gill arches, using coordinated movements of the jaws and operculum, the gill cover, for this ventilation. A swimming fish can simply open its mouth and let water flow past its gills, just like a shark does. Each gill has 2 rows of gill filaments composed of flattened plates called lamellae. The blood flowing through the capillaries within the lamellae picks up oxygen from the water. Notice that the countercurrent flow of the water and the blood maintains a partial pressure gradient down which oxygen diffuses from the water into the blood over the entire length of the capillary. Okay, so here's a close look at the gills in here, and then if you've ever gone fishing, you've caught a fish, you've probably checked out their gills. They're nice and red. They've got a color of a lot of oxygenated blood. The water traveling over the gills brings oxygen into the blood, and then so you've got deoxygenated blood on the the sort of the back side of the lamellae, and then it pushes blood forward towards the front end of the gill, and it's getting that exhausted blood is getting refreshed with new oxygen. So it's dropping off carbon dioxide on the back end here, and it's picking up oxygen on the front end here. The tracheal system of insects consists of a network of air tubes that breathe through the body. The tracheal system can transport oxygen and carbon dioxide without the participation of the animal's open circulatory system. Larger insects must ventilate their tracheal system to meet oxygen demands. So the respiratory system of an insect consists of branched internal tubes. The largest tubes, called tracheae, connect the external openings spaced through the insect's body. Air sacs formed in large portions of the trachea are found near the organs that require a large supply of oxygen. Okay, here on the second illustration here at the bottom, rings of chitin keep the trachea open, allowing air to enter and pass into smaller tubes called tracheoles. The branched tracheoles deliver air directly to the cells throughout the body. Tracheoles have closed ends with the blue-gray substance here. When the animal is active and using more oxygen, most of the fluid is withdrawn into the body. This increases the surface area of well-filled tracheoles in contact with cells. Now, in the illustration above here, we see a electromicrograph that shows the cross sections of tracheoles and a tiny piece of insect flight muscle. Each of the numerous mitochondria in the muscle cells lies within about 5 micrometers of the tracheole. Okay, so basically the plan of the insect is to perforate its body with holes in strategically located places to facilitate the oxygenation of its hemolymph. Lungs are an infolding of the body surface, usually divided into numerous pockets. The circulatory system, open and closed, transports gases between the lungs and the rest of the body. For the use of lungs for gas exchange varies among vertebrates that lack gills. A system of branching ducts conveys the air into the lungs in the mammalian respiratory system. And air inhaled through the nostrils is warmed, humidified, and sampled for odors. The pharynx directs air into the lungs and food into the stomach. Swallowing tips the epiglottis over the glottis in the pharynx to prevent food from entering the trachea. Air passes through the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, bronchi, bronchioles to the alveoli, where the gas exchange occurs. Exhaled air passes over the vocal cords into the larynx to create sounds. Cilia and mucus line up the epithelium of the air ducts and move particles up to the pharynx. The mucus escalator cleans the respiratory system and allows particles to be swallowed into the esophagus. Okay, so that's like when you're coughing up phlegm out of your lungs. That's what they call the mucus escalator. Inside the trachea, there are a number of cilia. Those cilia are constantly beating away from the lungs. They're trying to take any particulate matter that may have gotten down into the lungs, and they push it up into the throat, into the pharynx, and then you either cough up those particles or you swallow them again, and that is what they're calling the mucus escalator, cilia inside the trachea that help keep the lungs clean. Gas exchanges take place in alveoli air sacs at the tips of bronchioles. Oxygen diffuses through the moist film of the epithelium and into the capillaries. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the capillaries across the epithelium and into the airspace. Okay, here is a mammalian respiratory system. You can see here the nasal cavity and the mouth. You know, a lot of people breathe through their mouth, especially if they got a stuffed up nose. Comes down into the pharynx, which is the common area of the esophagus and the lungs. Then there's the larynx here, and then this is where the glottis and the epiglottis seal off whenever you swallow food. It seals off this area here into that protects the larynx. Okay, and then the larynx travels down here into the trachea and into the bronchus. Each bronchus goes into each one of these lungs, and then the further smaller division than the bronchus is the bronchiole. Just remember when you have like the arteries and the arterioles and the veins and the venules, these are just terms that describe the diminutive form of the existing structure. So the bronchus goes into the bronchioles, and then this is the diaphragm. It's at the base of the lungs. It's part of the structure that keeps the hearts and the lungs separate from the rest of the internal organs. And this organ, the diaphragm, when you breathe in, you pull the diaphragm down, and that allows air to pass in. Negative pressure causes air to press in, and then you release, and then that's positive pressure, that's exhaling. So that is how the lungs work structurally. Now inside the bronchioles, past the bronchioles, there are even tinier structures called the alveoli, and the alveoli are these little sac-like structures of the lung, which are covered by arterioles and venules, and they meet in capillary beds. These capillary beds surround the alveoli, and this is where gas exchange occurs. So you're breathing air in here, and you're breathing air into these tiny little air structures called the alveoli, and then the alveoli are providing place for the capillaries to exist, and then the capillaries, they are picking up oxygen and then going back to the heart, right through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and then out through the rest of the body. And then here's the vein, which is delivering the pulmonary artery, which is delivering the oxygen poor blood into the lungs. So it's going into these tiny little structures, the alveoli, with the capillary, and then oxygenated and then back out. Okay, so there's the structure. This is on page 703 if you want to take a closer look. From the nasal cavity to the pharynx, inhaled air passes through the larynx, trachea, and the bronchi to the bronchioles, which end in microscopic alveoli lined by thin, moist epithelium. Branches of the pulmonary arteries convey oxygen-poor blood to the alveoli. Branches of the pulmonary veins transport oxygen-rich blood through the alveoli back to the heart. Alveoli lack cilia and are susceptible to contamination. So the bronchi have cilia, but alveoli do have secretions called surfactants, which coat the surface of the alveoli. Preterm babies lack surfactant and are vulnerable to respiratory distress syndrome. Treatment is provided by artificial surfactants. So if you have a preemie baby, they may have to be treated with artificial surfactants in order to enhance their ability to respirate. Okay, so here is this is one of your figure 34.21, your inquiry, and it basically shows babies born under 1,200 grams and babies born over 1,200 grams. So on this side, they're preemies on the left, and they have on the right, they're preemies, and on the left, they're normal-sized babies. So most normal-sized babies were, if they died from other causes besides respiratory diseases. Respiratory distress syndrome. Okay, but on the preemie side, respiratory distress syndrome did become a problem. And then this indicates the surface tension of water. So this is with the surfactants are present, and this is where the surfactants were absent. So this person, Mary Ellen Avery, was a research fellow at Harvard University. She hypothesized that a lack of surfactant caused respiratory distress syndrome in preterm infants. To test this idea, she obtained autopsy samples of lungs from infants that had died of RDS or from other causes, and she extracted material from the samples and let it form a film on the water. Avery then measured the tension across the water surface and recorded the lowest surface temperature observed for each sample. So basically, these RDS deaths indicate a higher surface tension. So you want to have that surfactant, which is like soap kind of, to reduce the surface tension. Breathing ventilates the lung. The process that ventilates the lung is breathing. The alternation of inhalation and exhalation. Take a deep breath. Exhale. An amphibian such as a frog ventilates with its lungs by using positive breathing pressure, which forces air down the trachea. Birds have 8 or 9 air sacs that function and keep air flowing through the lungs. In fact, air passes through the lungs of birds in only one direction. It comes in, it goes through a couple of these air sacs, and it circulates on until it's exhaled. The passage of air through the entire system, lungs and air sacs, requires 2 cycles of inhalation and exhalation. Mammals ventilate their lungs by negative pressure breathing, which pulls air into the lungs. Lung volume increases as the rib muscles and the diaphragm contract. The tidal volume is the volume of air inhaled with each breath. So there's resting tidal volume, and then there's active tidal volume. Inhalation. Mammal breathes by changing the air pressure with its lungs relative to the pressure of the outside atmosphere. So basically, when you inhale, your muscles are drawing down on the diaphragm, which the diaphragm is part of the pleural cavity. The pleural cavity, I think we may get into that in our pig dissection lab, but it's the cavity that surrounds the heart and lungs. And it's at the base of that is a membrane called the diaphragm. If any of you sing or are familiar with the breathing exercises, they'll often refer to the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is when you breathe in, the muscles on the bottom contract that diaphragm and pull air in. It's negative air pressure. So and your rib muscles expand and allows air to come in. And then when you breathe out, it's positive air pressure. You breathe, the diaphragm relaxes and it pushes air out. The maximum tidal volume is called the vital capacity. After exhalation, a residual volume of air remains in the lungs. Each inhalation mixes fresh air with oxygen-depleted residual air. As a result, the maximum partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli is considerably less than in the atmosphere. In humans, the main breathing control center consists of neural circuits in the medulla oblongata, near the base of the brain. The medulla regulates the rate and depth of breathing in response to pH changes in the cerebrospinal fluid. The medulla adjusts breathing rate and depth to match metabolic demands. Okay. All right. So what happens is you get increased amount of carbon dioxide in your tissues, and it lowers your blood pH because it creates carbonic acid. This carbonic acid then starts to affect the medulla oblongata, which is in the primitive reptilian part of your brain, and then that sends a signal to increase your breathing so that you exhale more carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide goes out. So it's actually not oxygen. It's not the lack of oxygen will kill you, but what it is the presence of carbon dioxide that stimulates your breathing. When you run, the faster you run, the more you're breathing, the more carbon dioxide is in your bloodstream, the more carbonic acid. Okay, and actually there are sensors in major blood vessels that can detect blood pH, and including your carotid arteries, which are your main arteries. And this sends signals from the major blood vessels to the brain into the medulla oblongata. And the medulla detects a decrease in pH in the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, this fluid here in the center of the brain, the hypothalamus region. And then that signals from the medulla to the rib muscles to the diaphragm to increase the rate and depth of ventilation. So you need to expel carbon dioxide. That's why you're breathing more. And then as a subsequent impact is that you breathe in more oxygen. Sensors in the aorta and carotid artery monitor oxygen and carbon dioxide concentrations in the blood. These sensors exert secondary control over breathing. Now 34.7. All right, here we go. We're in the home stretch. Adaptations for gas exchange include pigments that bind and transport gases. These pigments are basically hemoglobin is what we're talking about. The metabolic demands of many organisms require that blood transport large quantities of oxygen and CO2. Blood arriving in the lungs has a low pressure of oxygen and a high pressure of CO2 relative to air in the alveoli. In the alveoli, CO2 diffuses into the blood and O2 diffuses into the blood and CO2 diffuses into the air. In tissue capillaries, partial pressure gradients favor diffusion of oxygen into the interstitial fluids and CO2 into the blood. Specialized carrier proteins play a vital role in this process. Okay, here are some animations. I hope that you can get them on your PowerPoint. I have not had very much luck getting these animations off of the PowerPoint, but go ahead and check there, and also check in your video study guide. I probably have something related to this topic in there. Okay, the colored bars indicate the partial pressures of oxygen and CO2 in the different locations. Okay, the air has more oxygen than the body does. The body therefore picks up oxygen in the bloodstream It delivers it to the cells that require the oxygen, the interstitial fluids, and to the body tissue cells through the capillary beds. The carbon dioxide is picked up by the bloodstream, and the carbon dioxide is evacuated by the exhaled air. Okay, so exhaled air does have carbon dioxide in it, but it has more carbon dioxide than the inhaled air, than the air in general. So that air picks up the carbon dioxide. So it's all diffusion, which is the basic point here. Okay, oxygen content is low in the blood. Carbon dioxide is high in the blood. Oxygen goes into the blood. Carbon dioxide comes out of the blood. Same on the other end of the capillary beds. So this is the alveoli. This is the capillary beds. Respiratory pigments circulate in the blood or the hemolymph and greatly increase the amount of oxygen that is transported. A variety of respiratory pigments have evolved among animals. These mainly consist of metal bound to a protein. In the humans, it's hemoglobin binds iron. The respiratory pigment of almost all vertebrates and many invertebrates is hemoglobin. A single hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 molecules of oxygen, 1 molecule for each iron-containing heme group. Hemoglobin binds oxygen reversibly, loading it into the gills and lungs and releasing it in other parts of the body. Okay, so here's a schematic of a hemoglobin molecule. There's a little iron atom right there. There's a heme molecule surrounding it, and this is where the oxygen binds onto the surface of the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin binds to oxygen cooperatively. When oxygen binds one subunit, the others change shape slightly, resulting in an increased efficiency for affinity for oxygen. When one subunit releases oxygen, the other release their bound oxygen more readily. Cooperativity can be demonstrated in the dissociation curve for hemoglobin. Okay, so here basically we have oxygen at a pH of 7.4, oxygen saturation in the various tissues. The curve shows the relative amounts of oxygen bound to hemoglobin. This is on the left-hand side, diagram A. The curve shows the relative amounts of O2 bound to hemoglobin exposed by solutions with different partial oxygen pressure. At a partial oxygen pressure of 100 millimeters of mercury, typical in the lungs, hemoglobin is about 98% saturated with O2 at PO2 of 40 milligrams per lung. Okay. What this is showing you here is that as the saturation is increased, in the oxygen level increases as well. I don't know. I'm confused by this diagram as well. It's on page 707. It requires more detail than I'm willing to give it at this point. And let's go to graphic B. pH and hemoglobin dissociation. Because hydrogen ions affect the shape of hemoglobin, a drop in pH shifts the O2 dissociation toward the curve on the right. It's called the Bohr shift. At a given pressure of oxygen, say 40 milligrams of hydrogen, say 40 millimeters, hemoglobin gives up more O2 at pH 7.2 than at pH 7.4, the normal pH of human blood. So the pH is lower in very active tissues because carbon dioxide produced by cellular respiration reacts with water, forming carbonic acid. Thereby, hemoglobin releases more O2, which supports the increased cellular respiration in the active cells. So when you get in your decreased pH, you're going to get hemoglobin is going to release more oxygen, because that's when you're producing more carbon dioxide, so you need more oxygen. CO2 produced during the cellular respiration lowers blood pH and decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for O2. So if it decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for O2, it means that hemoglobin is going to release more oxygen. Hemoglobin also assists in preventing harmful changes in blood pH and plays a minor role in CO2 transport. Most of CO2 from respiring cells diffuses into the blood and is transported into blood plasma bound by hemoglobin as bicarbonate ions. Diving mammals have evolutionary adaptations that allow them to perform extraordinary feats. For example, a Weddell seal in Antarctica can remain underwater for 20 minutes to an hour. An elephant seal, common off the coast of California, can dive for 1,500 meters and remain underwater for 2 hours. These animals have high blood-to-volume ratio. Deep-diving air breathers can store large amounts of oxygen, particularly in their tissues. Oxygen can be stored in their muscles in myoglobin proteins, and diving animals also conserve oxygen by changing their buoyancy to glide passively and decreasing blood supply to muscles, deriving ATP in muscles from fermentation once oxygen is depleted. Okay, now here is, this is from your scientific skills exercise on page 699, and basically, what does it show here? It shows that people with LDL cholesterol, there's a high percent, people that have a particular gene, that have one copy of a particular gene, are more likely to have high LDL concentration than people that have 2 copies of a particular gene. Okay, these are people with 2 copies. So there it is, high LDL, 1 copy of the gene, normal LDL, 2 copies of the gene. Okay, here is a diagram. This is part of your study assignment. This is on page 709, concept 34.2. It's just your basic, all right, inhaled air, high concentration of oxygen, diffuses into low concentration blood. Blood transports it to the tissues which have low concentration of oxygen. Okay, this is the respiratory cycle. This shows you that oxygen saturation in a fetus is higher than in the mother. How does that happen? I don't know. The hemoglobin of a human fetus differs from an adult hemoglobin. Compare the dissociation curves of 2 hemoglobins in the graph at right. Produce a hypothesis that explains the benefit of this difference between these 2 hemoglobins. Well, if the fetus is getting more oxygen, then it probably needs that for the metabolic functions that it has, that's undergoing a lot of growth.